Bring back the nighttime just for Dan. And if you remember to tell everyone about the Doomsday Machine, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe, that is Dan, that is Geoff, and we're talking about Arch Enemy on this episode 70 of Discography Discussion.
Gosh, has it been that many episodes?
Absolutely it has.
What was 69?
That was the Dillinger Escape Plan.
Ooh.
Stunningly appropriate, right?
Totally.
I tell you what, I had fun for the most part listening to this discography. This was a pretty easy listen.
Not a lot of low points with this band.
No, but at the same point, there's not like deep, like soaring highs. They're just pretty steady for the most part.
Yeah,
just quality
I mean,
music across the board for majority of it.
It's going to be hard to pull a lot of individual criticisms out of this, but damn it, I'm going to try my best. So Arch Enemy actually started all the way back in 1996 and featured the two Amat brothers, Christopher and Michael, which Michael we know from Carcass.
Yes, we do.
And I know him from Carnage, as well as their original lead singer, Johan, was also in Carnage, although the Carnage album I have does not feature him, thank God. So we're going to... We'll get into all that, but we've got some listener feedback to get through.
Well, before we start talking about the carnage that is Arch Enemy, I want to take some time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, so if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening. And now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
We love 5-star reviews here at Discography Discussion. And as we always say, whenever we get a review on iTunes or on Facebook, we will read that live on the show. Unfortunately, this one, we did not impress the listener as much as we hope we could have. But here's his review. The title is too long. I love the idea, but the main hosts are all very annoying for different reasons. It would be easier to tolerate if the episodes didn't start going past 60 to 75 minutes. Well, thank you, the Commissioner 69, for the 3-star review. Thanks for being honest, and keep sending us reviews on Facebook. You can leave us a review on Facebook.com/Discography Discussion or on Apple Podcasts. Under the review button, you can leave us either a starred review or a written review, whichever you would prefer.
So we got 2 comments on episode 68, Demon Hunter.
Derman Hunter.
First one is from AC, Alt1 on Twitter. In the name of whatever God you pray to, please don't do Kiss.
What?
Please. Maybe even
like
go
I've
the opposite of Roach Coach and say if you get X amount of reviews, you won't do Kiss. I'd swallow my pride and install iTunes onto my PC for that. Well, I have to say, AC, if you haven't installed iTunes on your PC to leave us a review, you can go to facebook.com/Discography Discussion and leave a review there.
Way to go, Joe.
It works both ways, right, Dan?
Absolutely.
We also got a comment on Podbean. This is from Jeffrey Santos. I really enjoyed this podcast on Demon Hunter. A very thorough, in-depth review of the albums. Thank you very much, and thank you for being one of our Patreon subscribers.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool dude.
Derek Solberg on the Demon Hunter episode on Facebook commented, thanks for the shout-out. Put an early morning smile on my face. You guys brought up a lot of good points I did not notice before. It made it interesting for me to go back and listen to them, so thank you for that episode. I mentioned Disturbed also, but I have a hunch you guys aren't big fans of them. Could be wrong. Haven't heard you bring them up in any of the episodes I've heard. I've listened to I'd be interested in your critique on Mastodon, Killswitch, or Threat Signal sometime in the future.
Threat Signal!
Can't wait for the next episode.
Well, I'm getting everybody on the Threat Signal train.
Well, except that one guy who said I got him on the train.
I know, but he was wrong because
it was actually you.
I know, that's my baby, man. I love that band.
Speaking of Patreon, Joey Riemann commented on our review of Like an Ever-Flowing Stream by Dismember. He said, I love me some Dismember. Check out Gatekeeper if you haven't. It's like a modern Dismember with more hardcore influence. I love it.
That sounds like I'm going to love it too.
So, Dan, tell me about Arch Enemy.
Arch Enemy was a band that was formed in 1996 with the Amat brothers, and Johan Livre, who were, Michael Amat and Johan started a band called Carnage back in the day, which ended up leading to the band Dismember, which is pretty cool. Michael, as we all know, was also in the band Carcass. And this was kind of supposed to be like a death metal, like a Swedish death metal supergroup. And they put out an album in 96 called Black Earth, which is exactly what it sounds like. A Swedish death metal supergroup. Would you go as far as to say that this is kind of Gothenburg?
Yeah, I mean, they're close enough to it. I mean, from a geographical standpoint, we've kind of mentioned it, before on other podcasts, but all of these bands are intertwined. You can always, trace them back to somewhere. Like, I know the original drummer from Arch Enemy drummed on In Flames Subterranean. So, I mean, like, there's always a cross. It's crazy it's like this massive, like, metal family. And there's like all these extensions, and even if you don't know somebody knows that person, and it's wild. It's a great way to go down a rabbit hole on Wikipedia, going clickbait and all the names. It's crazy.
Yeah, it definitely opened up a lot of different tabs while I was researching the band, and one of the things about Black Earth is that they were a super group of bands that a lot of people largely hadn't heard of, which I think becomes important whenever Arch Enemy goes from being just a supergroup into being its own band.
Isn't that the same story that Rammstein told about how they formed? We were just all in different bands, and we decided to hang out together and play a different style of music, and that style of music became extremely popular.
Right. Yeah, and it's a similar idea. So I just want to jump into it because we got a lot of albums to get through. In 1996, they released an album called Black Earth. And I remember when I first heard this, it was the initial thought I had is it sounds like me and Geoff are fighting for creative control.
Yeah, Black Earth sounds like black gold to me.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where there's a lot of traditional death metal stuff in there, like the old Swedish death metal stuff that I'm a huge fan of, like that God Macabre, Dismember, Carnage, that sort of stuff, and Entombed. There's a lot of that in there, which is what I was the big fan of. But then you've got all this noodly Gothenburg shit in there too,
which is what I love.
Which is what Geoff loves. So I think Geoff and I definitely had a Lady and the Tramp kind of moment with this record because we definitely met in the middle for a big sloppy kiss. It was. But
what's the one thing we can both agree upon on Black Earth?
We can agree that musically this is one of the greatest albums we've ever heard, and that vocally it sucks balls.
Oh, there we go. That's two things, and Dan is correct on both. God, I love this album, and I've mentioned it before. Sometimes vocally stuff can be so off-putting that I have a hard time paying attention to the rest of it musically. Musically, sonically, this stuff is just so good. I mean, the guy could be like, singing out his ass for all I care, and I'd still love it because
he's not singing out of his ass.
Sometimes it sounds like it, but I don't think so.
First time I listened to this, I thought, okay, the vocalist is doing like a Slayer thing. Dan quickly corrected me to a Napalm Death thing.
That is correct.
And, the music itself is the very heavy and melodic thrash of the mid-90s on the other side of the fucking planet. These are the albums I wish I had when I was studying guitar and trying to play metal, even though I was listening to a lot of Metallica and Megadeth that wasn't as metal. I had the old records, but then I find something like this from the mid-90s and I'm just upset with myself that I didn't look harder.
Yeah, instead you were listening to Load.
I still listen to Load. It's great.
And this sounds good. Like that's
it's really good.
I don't know if what we're hearing is some sort of modern remastering of this record, but for a death metal record from 1996, this thing fucking kills. I mean, the sound quality is really pristine on this, and it sounds big. The guitars sound big, the drums sound big, the vocals sound like ass.
Yeah, it's a reissue.
Okay, so there must have been some sort of remaster done on this because listening to it now, I was like, there's no way that it came out in 96 sounding like this. And I didn't have a lot of complaints. And I want to get the vocal thing out of the way first because we're going to be dogging on the vocals a lot for the next 3 albums. Or for this album and the following 2. And the biggest issue is that Johan Livre is a dead ringer for Barney Greenway from Napalm Death.
So if we were listening to grindcore, we'd be fine. But
exactly.
we're not. The vocals just don't match the music.
Not at all. And it's, like Joe said, it's kind of a little bit Slayer. It's a little bit Napalm Death. And the thing I don't like about that is that Slayer and Napalm Death are very one-dimensional bands. It doesn't make them bad, but they're one-dimensional. They're not dynamic. So, like, you know, when you take a band like Napalm Death and you've got Barney screaming over it, it sounds good because his vocal matches the single dimension of the band. You know what I mean? He fits the theme of the songs and everything.
Yeah, but Napalm Death isn't one-dimensional anymore.
Not as much anymore, but I'm talking like the earlier
stuff,
Napalm Death
right.
stuff.
I get you. I understand.
But Barney has consistently sounded good for that band. I don't think that he would sound good in a different band. I think he would only sound good in Napalm Death. And that's kind of the issue we're having with Johan on this Arch Enemy album, is that Black Earth is not an unmelodic record by any means. It is brutal at times. It's extremely heavy. It's next level stuff. But there's a lot of that Gothenburg death metal stuff in there and early Swedish death metal stuff where this record is extremely dynamic and shifts from super brutal to more melodic. And it almost seems like the Amat brothers are at war with one another, whereas one of them wants to keep things strictly death metal and the other one's just fucking with him and keeps throwing stuff in. You know, like it's, you know, so it's kind of like just an interesting salad, you know, where, you know, you've got all these different elements, because I feel like one guitarist is focused on death metal, whereas the other one wants to be in Van Halen or wants to be in Iron Maiden. And so you hear a lot of these like really melodic sections and breaks, and I think it's all cool because it makes the songs interesting. The only issue I have with the first 3 Arch Enemy albums is there's a whole lot of riff salad going on, which is the songs are extremely enjoyable to listen to while you are listening to them. But once you move away from the album, there's not a whole lot, despite the amount of melody that's there. There's not a whole lot to go back to. And I'm not like humming the melodies to myself like I am on like the Jester Race for In Flames.
Right.
It doesn't help that our 2018 ears have begun to demand dynamic range of every member of the band. You know, the drummer's expected to be able to not just do one thing really well. Guitarist, you got to be able to shift. Vocalist, you have to be able to sing as well as scream. And this was a time where you've got that Gothenburg death metal thing going on. You got the thrash going on and the same old influences of the 90s, which is Eddie Van Halen, Dimebag Darrell, Kirk Hammett, Dave Mustaine. Not bad influences for the time period, but this was also a time where the idea of what a heavy vocalist was a guy that could just stand there and bark at the mic.
Which is what he did.
And he did that. And it's unfair to listen to this with a modern set of ears and tear it down for that, because that is the standard that existed at the time. It's just frustrating to hear how good things got later as a result of this style, and then go back to this and think the only thing that really does suck is the vocals.
I don't know. I mean, listen to the In Flames stuff at the same time with Anders. I go back to it and I'm like, God, I wish Anders still sounded like that. You know, that's a vocalist, you know, that would be a contemporary to Johan, that I would say, you know, that guy is doing it right.
Yeah, or like Michael Stani from Dark Tranquility.
Right, that's another one.
I mean, sounds amazing.
Right, for the most part, like you said. I mean, I especially if you consider it in a broader spectrum, and you consider American bands as well and British bands, what Johan's doing is par for the course. You know, I guess the only exceptions, and maybe part of our frustration, is that it's the Swedish vocalists for the most part that are bringing it, that work well with that, you know, with the sound of the, you know, sonically the Arch Enemy has.
Well, you look at American metalcore that got so popular that was basically borrowing heavily from this European scene.
Right.
And so, one of the things was the riffing was ripped off heavily, but one of the things that came along with the Swedish death metal thing in the United States was the extreme vocal was carried over as well. Because, before that, when we were talking about, the origins of metalcore and death metal and stuff like that in the U.S., with metalcore, I would say that, bands like Earth Crisis and stuff would have been considered metalcore or Converge. But they were still more like hardcore bands that were combining like American heavy metal with hardcore. And so you don't have that same metalcore sound as you'd have from like a Kill Switch or a Bullet for My Valentine or something like that. Whereas, those bands were just basically playing Swedish death metal with breakdowns, and they were carrying over that extreme growly vocal. But if they had been influenced by Black Earth, it's one of those like, well, we'll keep the riffs, but the vocals are a little bit too mundane. But I wonder if I had bought this as a new release in 1996, if I would feel that way.
I think if we bought it in 96, I think we would enjoy it just like we enjoy it now. I really do believe that, especially since I was already aware of In Flames at the time, I would say, nope, this is better, meaning In Flames.
And like Dan said, it all suffers from riffarama. It all kind of runs together. It's enjoyable while I'm listening to it, but I don't remember a specific piece that I have to go back and listen to.
I think that Johan does as well as he can, and he does get a little bit better towards the end of his run.
He does.
But, Black Earth is a really great record to get into now if you're wanting to hear what melodic death metal sounded like in the 90s. And this is a great example of that. The only issue I have with this album musically, other than it being riff salad, is the fact that the guitarists seem to be a little bit at war with one another, and I think thematically they clash a little bit. Now, that can either add to your enjoyment of the record or it can take it away. Because, you look at an album like The Gesture Race, or The Gallery by Dark Tranquillity, and you have, the same sort of shit going on, but those albums, whatever reason, focused more on hooks. They honed in more on bringing the melodies out of the songs so that you would remember them. Whereas on this album, it's more like, okay, we're going to start off with a brutal death metal intro, and then we're going to transition into this melodic thing. Okay, solo, counter solo, and now we're going to play an interlude, a melodic interlude, and then we're going to go back into a brutal part. And it just seems very copy-pasted together, like scotch taped together into these songs. And so I don't think that they have great songs on Black Earth. I think that they just have a really cool collection of riffs that sound really good. So I think for a debut, it was great, but it did still have some of those growing pains associated with a debut in that, it was a great idea for what the band was or what the band could be and gave us a good preview for what we were going to get on the next two albums. But of particular note to me is 1998's Stigmata, which I thought was a vast improvement over Black Earth.
Every guitarist in the audience is having a good time listening to these riffs and how they're executed. This album is where you can start to actually listen to the songs and actually piece them together in a way that makes sense. Previously, you couldn't do that.
Yeah, this album actually had songs on it. I remember a lot of the melodies on this record and found it to be just much more enjoyable and much more in line with the more classic melodic death metal albums that I liked. This record was a little bit darker, too. They focused more on the darker, more depressing aspects of things. Because, the problem with Black Earth was that you would have this really brutal death metal part that you'd be into that would then transition into this, flying in the rainbows with unicorns solo.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, well, that's great if that's your bag. But,
it is.
For me, I'm just I could have used a little bit more
structure,
insanity, more heaviness, more aggression. And on Stigmata, they kind of tone that shit down a little bit, and it's a little bit more focused. And so the music on the record sounds more like your traditional melodic death metal. But, you know, I don't know. I think it's more aggressive, and I think it's a darker record. And again, the only issue I have with it is you've got Johan fucking barking like a golden retriever over the fucking thing. Yeah, and it distracts from the riffs that I like that are underneath it.
Which was kind of my point on Black Earth. Different vocalists would make you remember more.
A little bit better use of the classic thrash metal punk energy. They brought back the aggression, if that makes sense. There's a little more reason to be engaged with the record rather than just listening to whatever piece of noodling is going on here. I still like it more, and I definitely don't hate the first record, but I had a lot more fun consuming this one.
Musically, I mean, these guys got chops. You know, they know what they're doing. So I really don't have any complaints. And you know, they're steady. I guess that's the best way to put it. Musically, you're really not going to get too terribly disappointed outside of maybe an album or two with Arch Enemy.
Steady is a good word, Geoff, because a lot of what Arch Enemy does is a version of the same thing we did before. As a fan, you're engaged no matter which piece is coming on, with a few exceptions later on.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was very much Black Earth again, just better.
Right.
You know, it's like if you're going to compare Master of Puppets to Ride the Lightning. You know, it's not that Ride the Lightning is like a significantly worse record than Master of Puppets, but Master of Puppets went in and, you know, took what they did there and made it better. And, like, that's very much the same with Stigmata. I actually listened to this one 2 or 3 times. I liked it that much. I would definitely put it up there with, like, The Gallery, with The Gallery by Dark Tranquillity, or The Gesture Race. And it's easy to say Subterranean, but I'm not going to. Same drummer, so. Right. But, yeah, I think this was really well done and definitely gave us, you know, it definitely set up an expectation for me that, okay, this band's going to get good. But the thing that bothered me about Stigmata really was just that this band has progressive elements, but never goes away from the formula. Like, they could be a badass progressive band, but they never take that step up. And I don't know if that's like a lack of ability with the musicianship or if they're just playing it safe, you know. And I would say that it's probably more just playing it safe because this is what metalheads like. I mean, it resonated with me almost instantly, despite all of my biases that I might have, you know, for metal or preferences. It was good enough for me to be like, this is really good, and I'm going to spend some extra time on it.
See, I don't think that's a cop-out or playing it safe at all. I don't think you have to decide not to be Dream Theater. I think you have to decide that's the kind of music you want to make, or Opeth, or any other insert name of progressive band. I think if you're a guitar player and you're a band of musicians, you can decide just to play heavy music. And that's a more valuable decision for me than deciding to play it safe and not be Dream Theater.
I just think they play what they like. That was the impression I got.
No one has a responsibility to be progressive just because you know how to play every scale in the book, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Which he does. But no,
very nice, Geoff.
Well, I'm not saying that they have to be progressive. It's just that it kind of seemed like on this record that it was going that way, but then it didn't. It just kind of stopped. So it's kind of like an invisible wall in a video game. You know, you see this awesome mountain off in the distance. You're like, I'm going to climb that fucking mountain. And then you can't go that way.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
that was me totally playing EverQuest all the time.
Yeah. So
and then Oblivion came out, and Dan said, I can go to that mountain.
Right. So, like, that's all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that, like, they have to be Dream Theater or they have to be Opeth. I saw the potential there for them to go that way, and they just didn't. And that's fine because it was their decision, not mine. But, yeah, Stigmata was great, and I was, like, really excited to hear Burning Bridges right after because I was like, damn, like they really, that's like a 100% improvement. Like pretty much all of the complaints that I had about Black Earth were kind of taken care
Remedied.
of.
Yeah,
in Stigmata, and I thought that was a great record. And so Burning Bridges came out, and I was surprised because I started realizing that Stigmata and Burning Bridges are kind of like the two halves of Black Earth split up. So like Black Earth, I complained that, you got this metal, dark, evil sounding stuff, but then it goes into like Unicorn Rainbows. And I felt like Burning Bridges was the Unicorn Rainbows album, where they're like, okay, we're going to do what one guitarist wants on Stigmata, and then on Burning Bridges, we're going to do like a more fun record. And that's not to say that Burning Bridges isn't still a ball-busting heavy metal record. It definitely is. But there's definitely a lot more of that Iron Maiden power metal silliness going on with the solos. And I actually have to say that Johan sounds a lot better on Burning Bridges than he did on the previous two albums.
This is what 4 years of live shows will do for your ability.
You were mentioning, Dan, about it sounded like it was like, unicorns. It was almost like two different people wrote it. What happened? Well, kind of, sorta. Michael wrote all the lyrics, I believe, on both. But on the previous album, Michael is, I think, credited on majority of the songs. And here on Burning Bridges, it's Christopher and Michael that's credited on all the songs. So I think what you were actually, I think you're onto something there in the fact that there's more of a give and take on Burning Bridges. And I think that's why you get more of the happiness. And that, I think that's actually kind of what I kind of liked about this album, is there was more of a, I feel kind of positive in a lot of places when listening to it, which was, it's kind of weird for metal, and I guess for a lot of metalheads to feel that way, but this is kind of like my pop music. I like this kind of stuff. This is fun for me.
This is also amazingly modern sounding melodic death metal for 1999. This is the kind of shit that In Flames started to hit on with albums like Clayman, or even Colony, where they went in that more positive direction.
Remember what I said earlier about I wish I had found this back then?
Yeah. So like that positivity, like Geoff said, is definitely there. And I don't have a lot of bad things to say about Burning Bridges. I don't hold it as highly as I do Stigmata. I think Stigmata is a better album. But there's no denying that this was them trying to do better. Especially Johan actually he actually has kind of vocal patterns on this record. And so even though I don't love the way his voice sounds all the time, he doesn't just do the forever,
right.
Like he actually, will listen to the songs and come in, where vocals are appropriate, and it just sounds a lot smoother.
It's funny you mention Colony and Clayman, because this actually came out the same year as Colony.
Yeah.
I get more of the, what we view now as the traditional, Gothenburg melodic death metal vocals. You can kind of hear a little bit of that.
He sounds a little Anders-ish in his delivery.
He really does, and I have to admit that at that time, not currently, but at that time, and that version of Anders is one of my all-time favorite vocalists.
Yeah.
So I was really ecstatic when I think that might be part of the reason why I like Burning Bridges so much, is that there is a lot of happiness, and the vocals are massively improved over the previous two albums.
It definitely sounds like they sat him down.
Or got him a vocal coach or something.
There was definitely some work done on the vocals. And I think the good thing is that on the record it comes across very well. You can see the progress that they made. I think that Johan and Michael and Christopher were buds, and they hey, our friend's gonna sing for the band. You know what I mean? Like one of those things. They even credited Johan as the bass player on Black Earth, even though that wasn't true. They just wanted it to seem like it was a real band. So they're just like, yeah, we'll just say Johan played the bass, and it's so funny.
Yeah, we saw him in the corner of the studio on a break, just farting around with it. So he definitely played the bass.
Definitely played all the bass on the record. It's kind of like in Sepultura, how Mac said that their bass player, I don't think played any bass on the records until Chaos AD. But he's an amazing bass player now. But anyway,
yeah.
He had to learn. But yeah, no, it's just interesting that it definitely something they say, hey, buddy, we want to talk about your performance, and that's really hard to do. I mean, even in anything, when you have a group of friends together and somebody does something you didn't like, it's one of those like, how do you approach it type of things. And unfortunately, it ended in him having to leave the band.
Yeah, and that's
after
not
this record.
Yeah, that's not unusual. I mean, I think the three of us can commiserate with that. I mean, we've all performed music at some point or another, and generally doesn't last that long.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, Geoff, you don't have to mention Sunday Day Real Estate on every single episode.
Right.
And he's like, fuck you guys, I do what I want. And then he shits in a bag and burns it on my front porch. So
what's funny is I think Dan has mentioned them more in the last 5-6 episodes than I have.
Side note,
I got tired of drinking. That's what it was.
I was listening to the Hopes Fall episode that we did, and realized that Geoff is not the first person that brought up Sunday Day Real Estate on our podcast. It was, in fact, Dan Terry. So
congratulations, sir.
Take that from what you will. Back to Arch Enemy. Johan actually ended up leaving the band after this album came out, and it was cited that he left due to concerns about his live vocal performance.
Translated, you're not practicing.
You're not doing well, Johan. We love you. You're our bud, but I think you got to go. We want to take this shit full time. We released Black Earth as a supergroup. We thought it was really cool. We continued with the band after that, and we felt like it was we might be able to take this thing big time. And so they either fired Johan or he quit.
Or it's just a mutually, split into the ways.
And this is where Arch Enemy takes an interesting turn as a band.
This is what I heard when Dan said we're going to talk about Arch Enemy. Because this is the Arch Enemy
that everyone knows.
I know. This is the band that I was introduced to the first time I heard Arch Enemy. And that is Wages of Sin from 2001.
Oh, man.
Notable by everybody and anybody that talks about this band with someone that has never heard of them. The lead vocalist is a chick.
And she can kick your ass.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
To be fair, there's not a lot of female heavy vocalists that can actually pull it off.
Well, I want to get the elephant out of the room right now. Yes, there are bands out there where metal bands that have a female vocalist, where the initial impression is, or the initial thing that people think is that they're doing this just to get popularity, or they're doing this just to create some sort of image, like it's a gimmick. And I can tell you, based on the way that Angela sounds, that she got picked for this band because she was the best fucking singer for the job.
Yep.
Damn right.
And it took a lot for that to happen.
Yeah, because I'm sure plenty of dudes showed up and tried out and didn't make the cut. The most interesting thing about Angela's vocal delivery is that she is a growly vocalist, which is my preference.
Does she sing? Does she have any melodic delivery at all throughout these 5 albums? Because I don't remember any.
She doesn't do any clean singing, but I think her delivery is still melodic in the sense that she growls, obviously, but what I like about the growly vocal is that it can translate to a melodic chorus pretty well without the need for clean vocals, and that's basically what they banked on.
It's the Haste the Day logic, where if somebody else performed this song, they could sing it and get away with it.
Well, Haste the Day had tons of clean vocals all over their stuff. Arch Enemy didn't really use that until much later in their career. And I think there were some clean vocals on later albums, but I believe those were performed by Christopher Amat, and not Angela. Obviously, you can tell. But Man, Wages of Sin is interesting in that it is, unlike Burning Bridges, this is not necessarily a fun record. It's not a record that necessarily makes you feel good. It is still a melodic death metal record, so it's not like all brutal all the time. But this is the first time in the band that I started noticing a little bit of a shift in the songwriting, almost to accommodate the new vocalist, in that Angela is like 10 times more brutal than Johan ever was. You know, I don't like using the term singer upgrade too much, but this was clearly an upgrade as far as their vocal delivery went. This put them in the same playing field as your Dark Tranquility or your In Flames, you know, where you had a growly vocalist. But I think what still sets Arch Enemy apart is that their solos don't conform to the melodic death metal formula. And so they always kind of sound fresh and new. They almost have a little bit of like a traditional heavy metal feel to them, or power metal feel to them.
Yeah, I was going to say power metal was the vibe that I got. And then sometime, especially later on, then not necessarily on this album, but the galloping bass really starts to become real prominent as well, which is another big, power metal staple.
Yeah, and like Wages of Sin to me is probably the best Arch Enemy album, in my opinion, in the sense that everything is in place. You still have that really good, guitar trade-off between the Amat brothers. You've got Angela just kicking ass on the vocal side of it. And then you've got, the drumming is rock fucking solid. I can't really comment on the bass playing because I can't hear it really that much on here.
You will later, though.
Yeah, so Wages of Sin is just kind of their, hey guys, we changed singers, but we're still fucking Arch Enemy. And it actually had the effect of almost creating this idea of what was before this wasn't Arch Enemy. And this is Arch Enemy. Like they pulled off a rebranding on this.
And did it very well.
That was one of the best things that they could have done. I think Wages of Sin is great. One of the first things I noticed about this record, too, is that there's more groove in the guitars. And the focus on songwriting is much stronger than what they had really given before. The first three albums can be accused of being riff salad. This record focused a little bit more on having songs with choruses. And I know if you go on Metal Archives or whatever, you've got douchebags being like, it's basically just radio rock with a growling vocalist. And I'm like, nah, it's not really accurate.
This wasn't radio at the time.
This is metal as fuck.
We were almost at this point with radio. And I actually wonder if this album was the result of Arch Enemy changing with the time as this style of Gothenburg started to become prominent.
Yes and no, because they didn't make the same concessions that their peers made. You've got In Flames with Rewrite to Remain, which was more of a mainstream sounding record where they were trying to go radio with it. And Dark Tranquility even had, I don't think Dark Tranquility was trying to go radio, but, Michael Stani did a lot more clean vocals and, trying to really just make it into this, really listenable, smooth thing. Whereas Wages of Sin is kind of a middle finger to all of that. It is aggressive. It's heavy. The vocals are uncompromising. The growly vocal cannot be denied in the sense that a lot of bands don't go for it because it severely limits their radio sensibility. A lot of people to this day still don't appreciate that raspy growl. And she comes at it, in a very Carcass, Jeff Walker kind of way. And I think that's really cool, too, with the Michael Amott and Carcass connection.
Right. In
the sense that, you're kind of getting a spiritual successor to what Carcass was doing on Heartwork and what they were doing on Swan Song. You get a lot of that. And I think she really kicked ass on this record and really brought the band up to a different level. And the music didn't necessarily have to improve that much, but it did anyway. Because, they did a re-recording a few years later of Angela singing some of the older material, and it sounded great. And so, it's kind of a what if. Like, let's hear Black Earth with Angela. Let's hear Stigmata with Angela. Let's hear Burning Bridges with Angela. But then it's like, well, that's kind of a big middle finger to Johan. Like, no one's going to do that to their bud.
Yeah, you don't want to erase them from history, but my God, I mean, she's really good.
She's what we needed.
Yeah, I mean, she
100%.
really is. She fits this band so well. Angela time period of this band is by far my favorite because I think she was the missing piece, in my opinion.
Well, and I think it's interesting too because just to kind of fight that whole like, oh, it's a gimmick or it's this or that. It's less of a gimmick to me in the sense that like she joined an already established band. It's not like any of us hated Arch Enemy before Angela was in it. You know what I mean? Like there was no reason to hate the band. The vocals weren't super strong, but like as metal fans, it's not like the vocals are necessarily a make and break kind of thing. You kind of have to come into extreme metal expecting vocalists to be of different quality. Yeah, you're here for the fucking riffs, man. You're not here for how beautiful the singer sounds, And Wages of Sin carries that on. I noticed more groove in the guitar, and I noticed more of a focus on like actual songwriting, which we had talked about anyway, was already occurring anyway. So I think Wages of Sin, in a lot of people's eyes, is kind of the debut of what we would think of Arch Enemy now.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. That's what most people look for. I think that this album really shows the progression of the rest of the group's musical ability, and like we say, it's almost like like you've gone from having an abstract thought to something that you've gotten more concise as time goes on, and that's how I feel they've gotten with their music. Instead of being, they were a little more all over the map, and now they're quite a bit more focused. And I think whenever you get somebody focused in whatever their profession is, generally they're gonna do better. And I think that they produced better music on this album than they have to anything to date, personally.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this was also kind of we're an actual band now called Arch Enemy, and we're not some super group of guys that were in other bands that were more notable.
Right, because now we're gotten to the point where Arch Enemy is more notable than what their previous bands were.
Right, it's its own brand now.
Right.
And so when we move into 2003's Anthems of Rebellion, this is where things start to get a little bit iffy for me. Anthems of Rebellion takes that, how I mentioned on Wages of Sin that there was more focus on groove and more songwriting. I feel like Anthems of Rebellion is more of a departure from that sound. I feel like the songwriting is significantly diminished from what we'd had on Wages of Sin. But you also have to look at the time period that it came out in, which was 2003. So this is like As I Lay Dying's Frail Words collapses out already in the United States. And, Zayo's been a thing for a while. Zayo being one of the first bands to incorporate that European growling vocal into metalcore, And, like, Anthems of Rebellion was the first thing that I heard from Arch Enemy in the United States. They were on a Headbangers Ball compilation. And it was the song We Will Rise. And I remember just listening to it and thinking it was awesome. I didn't know anything about the band. I just thought it was a cool song. Although looking back on it, it's like kind of one of the most simplistic songs on the record. And one of the things that irritates me about it is that I noticed that the vocals had like a lot of like post-processing like effects put on them. And I was kind of like, it makes the growl sound a little bit more electronic, a little bit more liquid. And when I say that, I'm not saying that the vocals are quantized or that they are artificially created. They're not. It's clearly a strong growling vocalist doing the vocals, but then all these effects are thrown on top of it. And that was one of the things that was immediately noticeable to me, and I was kind of like, what is the deal with this band? So I bought Anthems of Rebellion because that was kind of all you could get. I remember trying to get Wages of Sin, but I had to like import it you know? Like, you just have to go back to that time period, you know, like 2002, 2003. And
Bear Share, baby, Limeware.
And I really liked Anthems of Rebellion until I heard Wages of Sin, because I did go ahead and import it. You know, I did get it, you know. And, you know, I was like, wow, this Wages of Sin record is awesome. But this Anthems of Rebellion sounds like the same thing, but significantly watered down. The solos aren't really there like they were on Wages of Sin. And it just seems like it's like verse, chorus, verse kind of song structures.
This is their attempt at radio.
Absolutely, because what they're banking on now, during this time, this was the beginnings of the new wave of American heavy metal, which you can just shorten by saying it's metalcore.
Right.
So this record was a little bit more in that vein. I'm not saying it's metalcore, you know, but I think it sounded more kind of like a Devil Driver, you know, kind of sound. And like I said, there's nothing necessarily bad on Anthems of Rebellion. I'm not saying that it's like total shit, but it's not. I don't know. Like, go back and compare it to Black Earth, and it's like, oh fuck, okay.
Yeah, and so you feel like it's gotten like too formulaic.
It's watered down. Yeah, it's definitely an attempt at more mainstream success, despite its limitations. And when I say limitations, I'm talking about the growled vocals. This was a melodic death metal band trying to gain mainstream appeal without selling out, like without going to the clean vocal route, or, you know, a lot of those little tricks that bands did back then to try to get into people's, you know, people's ears.
Yeah, but there were a couple songs on this one that had clean vocals. I mean, granted, it was Christopher Amat. It wasn't.
Yeah, but it wasn't like the focus. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
I know what you're saying.
There's a little bit there, but it's not like, you know, like you're not. He's not singing like full on, like they're not doing fucking Evanescence duets, you know, like that sort of shit.
Yeah, I know
like
what you're
the
saying.
kind of shit that Lacuna Coil pulled later on in their career. Yeah, but anyway,
no, you kind of hit on something before that I actually kind of like, and it's what you don't like. It's the reason why I like industrial music, and that is kind of like the layering and some of the processing that goes along with the vocals. You know, the way I look at it is, you know, your voice is an instrument, and everybody always adds effects to guitars. Why can't we appreciate people adding effects to the vocals? I actually like that. And for me, it's kind of fun, you know, to listen to it, and it's why I like bands like Cybreed, because they go fucking crazy with that stuff, and I don't mind it on this at all, because I think it's well done. It's not completely over the top. I don't think it takes away from her abilities. You can still tell that she's a badass vocalist. But it's a preference thing. You know, that's just what I like, and something that Dan likes is, you know, different, because we're different people. We have different perspectives.
I don't really care as much for electronic assisted music, and it's not that it's assisted. I think that certain songs would sound fine without the effects. I like growling vocalists. Like, I genuinely like it. And so I like to hear what it just sounds like to hear someone do that on a microphone. It's a preference thing. Yeah. But it doesn't bother me as much on Anthems as it will when we roll into 2005's Doomsday Machine.
Welcome, my son. Welcome to the machine. The Doomsday Machine. The purpose of the Doomsday Machine is to make sure that people know you have one. Why didn't you tell anyone?
Well, I think that this record is, it's like Anthems Part 2 to me. But it's almost more so. Like, it kind of comes off, comparatively speaking, as kind of weak in comparison to their older material. Especially if you're going to go back to Wages of Sin or Burning Bridges or Stigmata. Like, Burning Bridges sounds like fucking Napalm Death in comparison to Doomsday Machine. There's just so much more like Iron Maiden worship on this record, where it just kind of lightens the feel of everything. There's not as much death metal on this, but then you've got Angela in there doing her death metal growl, but it's got like it's got all these effects on it. Like, the effects bothered me so much on Doomsday Machine that it makes me dislike the vocal performance overall.
Really?
Like, her shit just seems indistinguishable. And it's not that it sounds weak. Like, she's probably the most metal aspect of this record. And again, the arch enemy was always giving that middle finger to the clean vocal led masses, that were going on at the time, whereas they kind of still stuck to that brutal vocal throughout. They were so proud of it, that they just stuck with it. But the effects bother me, and that there's a lot of dual vocal tracking going on.
I love that stuff.
I hate that shit. I'm not a big fan of it. It's just it makes the vocals sound muddled and hard to understand, and that bothers me.
Okay, Dan's saying that he has difficulties understanding vocals with some of the stuff that he listens to, and he's saying this is hard. I'm just teasing you, Dan.
It's fine if I can't understand it, but you just were a guy screaming into a mic.
Right.
Or
so what were the lyrics to Physician Heal Thyself the first time you listened to it?
I heard Ralph.
Here's the problem I have.
Here's the thing, though. I understand all of Zayo's vocals because I've been listening to it for so long.
Yeah, but
Right.
you didn't understand that the first time you heard it.
No, I kind of did.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, I did.
I was there. We both asked the same question. What exactly did he say?
It's
I have no idea because he's layering his vocals.
He didn't layer his vocals on Physician Heal Thyself.
What makes you think he didn't?
He fucking screamed into a PA, and they recorded the PA with a microphone.
Which nullified the idea
Which is
of
totally,
this is what a natural sounding vocalist in a club would sound like.
We're not talking about that right now. We're not talking about that.
See, you've never heard, with limited exception, you've never heard a straight, heavy vocalist the way that you are saying you like to hear them. They're all screaming into a microphone. They're all being mixed and leveled. You've never heard a raw, heavy vocalist.
In concert?
In concert, they're going through a PA, which is being mixed and is giving artificial compression
your
to the situation.
Your point is fucking invalid. Okay, there's a huge difference between somebody being leveled and going through electronics, okay? Yeah, obviously that's fucking pedestrian basic shit. I get that voices are being fucking amplified, okay? What I'm saying is that it's very obvious if you compare the fucking vocals on Doomsday Machine to the vocals on Wages of Sin, it's obvious that there are electronic effects present in the vocals, different vocal takes being mixed together with said effects thrown onto that vocal.
So why is layered vocals bad?
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it was bad on this record. It's not my go-to. It's not my favorite thing as a fan of the band.
This album actually has the track that really put them on the map, though, as far within the general population, and that's Nemesis.
I thought We Will Rise was what put them on the map.
Oh, I thought it was Nemesis was the most well-known of their stuff at the time, and I didn't even think it was close.
Pretty sure it's We Will Rise, Geoff. That's the song that I think of when I think of Arch Enemy.
I think of Nemesis, so...
Nemesis was a big hit.
Yeah, but
for
you
them.
listen to Gothenburg death metal, so you're allowed to have an entirely different perspective.
No, I mean Nemesis was a big. It was a big song for them for sure.
It was their biggest song to date. I can guarantee you that. I mean, if you go through and look at sales and all that kind of shit, which I don't have in front of me, but I'm betting that this was their most popular at the time.
I just didn't think that Doomsday Machine hit as hard as... It might have hit as hard as Anthems. But, I don't know. I just...
I think we're going to start seeing a trend where we're going to start saying that it doesn't hit as hard as X previous album.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have that trend progressively throughout the rest of their discography for the most part.
Well, I think Doomsday Machine was a really big breakthrough record for them. I think it's the record they got the most shit for. And again, I don't really understand 100% why. Like, my complaints notwithstanding, my complaints are simply that I just didn't like the way the vocals sounded because of how they were produced. But it doesn't take away from her performance. She legitimately performed those vocals. It's just that, I just didn't really enjoy Doomsday Machine that much. And it had a couple of cool songs with some cool choruses. But that's not really why I listen to death metal. And I would question whether you could even call any anthems or Doomsday death metal. I think they sound more metalcore than anything else.
So did the mainstream follow Arch Enemy? Or did Arch Enemy just vicariously become the mainstream?
They were influenced by metalcore. There's no denying that.
So it's 2005 and we're just tagging along for the ride
2003,
at this point.
metalcore was already huge in the US. Anthems of Rebellion was their big break in the US. Doomsday Machine continued that. There's a lot of people that think of Anthems of Rebellion as the first Arch Enemy album, which is funny because they're off by 4, but whatever.
I think this is also the first album that Angela is heavily involved in the at least in the lyric
in the writing and the lyrics. Yeah.
So you have a new voice, you have a different perspective. So I mean that could be part of it too. Whenever you have somebody else bringing something else to the table, your sound's going to change. In most instances, just because it's new input. I think it's interesting we talk about how they become metalcore whenever they, were kind of at the forefront of melodic death metal, and now they're past melodic death metal, and we're talking about, they are now metalcore on a lot of their stuff, where metalcore pulled quite a bit from melodic death metal. So I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting, that, we're kind of putting them in both genres.
When both genres very heavily borrow from each other. Yeah.
Right.
I don't think Doomsday Machine is total shit, but I think it is kind of the low point for the band. Because
it's not the first time where we've kind of felt that what we view as the low point is one of the high points from a popularity,
from a sales perspective.
Yeah, and it's happened more than a few times where as soon as they quote unquote go mainstream, that we all of a sudden become hipsters. And it's not really that. It's just that we're looking for something in particular that we really have enjoyed, and we're starting to lose those elements as they get more popular, because the stuff that we like, and we like to think that most of our listeners enjoy, is stuff that's not necessarily mainstream. That's part of why we do our podcast.
Stuff that's written for the love of the genre.
Exactly.
More so than stuff that's done just to make a buck.
Right.
But at the same time,
unlike us, because we want to make money.
If you're going to put, Patreon. If we're going to, look at Doomsday Machine from a sales perspective, absolutely. It was one of their biggest records. But I also think there's kind of like the Demon Hunter effect there, in that, you put this on for somebody and they're like, this is the best metal I've ever heard. Yeah, I get it. It's the best metal that you've ever heard. And this is one of those albums that it introduces you very lightly to some of the more extreme aspects of extreme metal. And so people that listen to this, because there's lots of people I know that love Arch Enemy but can't listen to Carnage or Dismember or Entombed, so it's one of those, this is the kind of album that you show somebody that's not really, doesn't understand, the growling vocal or the, because, you can show somebody something like Doomsday Machine and it's okay because it's melodic and it's memorable, but that same person's not going to enjoy Wages of Sin. They're not going to enjoy Black Earth, because they don't have any point of context.
Right.
It's a beginner's metal CD. And I felt the same way about Anthems, is that Anthems was a beginner's metal CD. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's just worth noting that this was their moment of their most popularity. And honestly, they kind of got that shit out of their system with those two records. My opinion.
I love me some Rise of the Tyrant.
Rise of the Tyrant is very much like Wages of Sin, in my opinion. But they haven't forgotten their catchiness that they achieved on the past two records. they haven't forgotten what made them a household name. You know, in me and Geoff's perfect world, being a household name is having fucking great solos and, you know, creating a really awesome, you know, atmosphere for your record, or having cool lyrics or whatever. But for the majority of people, their idea of a good band is a band that can write songs that you're going to remember. It's not necessarily about the technical proficiency of how they're doing it. When you become a diehard metal fan, you tend to pay more attention to that. But when you're somebody that's just starting out, you know, I think Rise of the Tyrant was perfect because you could go from Doomsday Machine to Rise of the Tyrant, and that's whenever you're crossing over now from being a casual metal fan to being like, wow, the shit on this record is a lot more complicated than what was on Doomsday Machine. And so that's, you know, it's these types of stepping stones that, you know, that makes you into that underground metal fan that starts having opinions about, you know, what a band sounds like, you know, and having preferences of being like, I liked the way this sounded, but I didn't like the way that sounded, you know. And it's the same with any music. It's not just metal, but this is just like, you know, Anthems and Doomsday were probably your stepping stones. And you hear something like Rise of the Tyrant, and you're like, okay, this is a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more heavy. And it has that underground appeal where you kind of feel like you're enjoying something just for you.
Have you gotten used to the process and layered vocals by now?
Yeah, because I kind of accepted after Doomsday that they weren't going to go anywhere.
Okay.
And they didn't.
No, because they're quite prominent on this one. I think even more on this than the last.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of a detriment to the band, though, because of all the assholes out there that are going to be like, well, she can't really do it. But I can tell you from watching live videos and seeing the band live that she absolutely is the real fucking deal. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like they're doing these because for whatever reason, either she or the producer thinks it sounds better. So, I mean, somebody in the band, whether it be Angela herself or someone else, thinks that the vocals sound better that way. I know that around 2002 she actually had some problems with her vocals. She actually developed nodules on her throat, which could have a little something to do with the way this is all being produced, in that she was basically just going for broke every time she screamed. And if you're not screaming properly, especially with these types of vocals, you can really hurt yourself. And you could eventually get to the point where you can't do them at all. And it's great that she, you know, had the surgery or whatever and got it taken care of. But like, that's a really real thing. And I can't help but the dickhead in me can't help but wonder if that's part of it.
Right? Are they covering for her?
Right?
Are we doing this processing so you don't have to sound quite as good live? You don't have to, you know, blow your vocals out every night kind of thing? Is that what you're thinking?
Maybe. It's possible. And again, obviously the health of the individual is more important than what the fan thinks, you know, like.
Well, and if that ends up being true, I mean, she wouldn't be the first, you know, vocalist that would continue to be popular.
That's why Avenged Sevenfold changed their vocal style.
Yeah.
100% was because he had issues. You know, the old if anybody remembers, the old Avenged Sevenfold was significantly more extreme vocally than it is now. But you know, I think on Rise of the Tyrant, to get back to that record, is, you know, like, I thought that this sounded more like the melodic death metal band that I liked starting out. It was a step in the right direction, if it was anything.
I enjoyed it quite a bit. I just didn't think that you were going to be okay with the vocals. That was what kind of surprised me on it.
I would argue every complaint Dan has with layered vocals was done at some point by Dan Wayant on a song that he likes. So I kind of find it interesting that we're talking about layered vocals.
I'm just saying I didn't like the way it sounded in Arch Enemy.
So yeah, kind of like whenever you had issues with Johan in the beginning, it just didn't fit the sound kind of thing?
Right.
Okay. I think it fits the sound better, personally.
I just think Angela would have sounded better without the vocal layering.
As a whole, though, wouldn't Arch Enemy sound better if there was an alternative to just constant extreme vocals? But then again, that's the 2018 set of ears where we expect everything to be
yes
dynamic.
And no, which we'll get into.
I don't know. I actually think for this band, I don't think it needs clean vocals, which is fucking...
It's the old black metal argument where, the music is extremely atmospheric and has reverb and does all these strange moving in and out things, but then the vocals are just straight. It's just a thing.
Well, it's weird coming from me because normally I am the huge proponent of clean singing, with growls. I mean, like, I want that dichotomy. But I think the music itself is in parts beautiful enough that in itself offsets it. So I want her to be brutal with her vocals 24/7. That's just me. That's just my personal opinion.
That's what the fans want. I mean, that's part of the package now.
Right.
Is getting that extreme vocal all the time.
Right. And I think I get what Dan is saying. What you're trying to say is that she's badass enough. She doesn't need any of that shit. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
I get it. I just happen to think that it's just, I like the texture that it adds personally, but
I just think that it pushes her back a little bit in the mix, though, too. Like, I've noticed that, like, for whatever reason, everything after Wages of Sin, Angela has it cut through the mix like she does on that record. And again, that's not her fault. That's whoever's mixing it's fault.
Right. I think it adds an element, but I get what you're saying. You want her to be more prominent. You don't, because you just want to be able to hear her vocals. You don't want to have all this other shit, layered on top of it. You're trying to focus on specifically what she's doing because she's doing it well.
Correct.
I get it, but I don't know. I just kind of, like I say, like I equate it to a guitar when you have all these different effects.
And
that's why I like it.
It's a preference. It's not a statement of fact or anything like that.
Nope.
Now
it's a great fucking album.
It's a correct opinion.
on 2011's Chaos Legions.
Oh, ready for Chaos Legions?
Chaos Legions was kind of like a little too cheesy for me.
Cheesy as fuck at times, but God damn,
cheesy.
I love it.
I don't know if I love it, but it's to me it's more just like Doomsday Machine. Like, I feel like they really took a huge step up on Rise of the Tyrant, and then when you get to Chaos Legions, it's like, okay, we needed to make some money, so we made this record that's a totally serviceable Arch Enemy record, but I don't really feel the passion in this one. Like, I felt a certain amount of passion on their stuff prior to this, and this one almost just like, I don't know if it's because we've already had 1, 2, 3, 4 albums like this, and so here's another one.
Yeah, well, I think there's some foreshadowing going on this album. It's the last album with Christopher. It's the last album with Angela. So I'm just wondering if maybe things have just kind of, as the band is at this point in time, it's just kind of gone its course.
Yeah, it's like, it's my job, so we have to make another album.
Yeah, it's almost like they're mailing it in. This was probably... It's the most disappointing album for me personally that the Angela's fronting. Although I think it's probably the most popular album that she's fronted. I think this is the first one they actually had chart on the Billboard charts here in the States. I think is War Eternal. I meant Chaos Legion, not War Eternal. I don't know what. But yeah, I think this is the first one that charted for them here in the States on standard Billboard 200.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because it's there. Here we go again. It's the highest charting, and it's the least impressive to us.
It's not super impressive. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I actually think Angela's vocals got pretty extreme on Chaos Legions. She sounded almost a little deathcore in a few places, and I thought that was pretty cool.
You said the magic word. Now I get to label this as deathcore.
It's not deathcore. Shut the fuck up. But yeah, Chaos Legions didn't really do it for me. Before that, they had released a compilation of older Arch Enemy material called The Root of All Evil, and it had a lot of the old songs from the first 3 albums re-recorded with Angela on them, and they sound great. What's interesting too is I believe during this time, or maybe it was a little bit later, but Michael Amott and Christopher Amott and Johan actually got put together and formed a band called Black Earth that only plays the first 3 Arch Enemy stuff.
Yeah.
So that'd be interesting to see live, I think. I don't know how I feel about it objectively, but, it's been a few years. Maybe Johan's a fucking beast now, who knows?
Yeah, you never know. We've experienced that before on this podcast where somebody's come back from years later and we're like, wow.
And been a fucking beast. Yeah. So, Chaos Legions, I don't have a lot to say about it other than it's another Arch Enemy album. If you like Doomsday Machine and Rise of the Tyrant, then you're probably going to like Chaos Legions. There's nothing wrong with it objectively, but it does sound a little bit less inspired than what we had before. So if you guys are ready to address the second elephant in the room.
There's another one?
There's another elephant. There's a lot of elephants with this band.
All right, Dan. 2014, War Eternal.
Okay,
what happened in the last 3 years?
So Angela's gone.
Christopher's gone. Which is, more vital than you think to the sound of the band. Angela has been replaced by another vocalist named Alyssa White. Is it Gluz or Glues? I think it's Gluz. Glues? I don't know. We'll call her Alyssa for now. I think it's Glues.
Yeah. Alyssa was the vocalist of a band, a deathcore band called The Agonist, who I'm actually a pretty big fan of. I'm a fan of them with Alyssa. I'm a fan of them without. And Alyssa had a really powerful scream, growl, a little different than Angela, but also was pretty good at doing clean vocals too in The Agonist. So when War Eternal came out, I know there was this big thing about oh my God, Arch Enemy has a new singer. People weren't sure if they were willing to accept the band without Angela. And I think some of us in this room feel that way.
That would be me.
I'm going to go on record and say that I actually like Alyssa's vocals more than Angela's.
Oh, that's like a dagger to my heart.
I'm sorry, but Alyssa does all the shit that I was complaining about with Angela. Or she doesn't do all the shit that I complained about with Angela. Her voice fucking cuts through the mix. She's on top of it. She controls it. I like her highs more. I like the rasp, but I like that it's like I don't know, man. It's pretty intense. It's definitely more of a metalcore rasp, and but I'm okay with that. And I like her deeps. Her deeps are a hell of a lot better than Angela's were. And holy shit, other than a little bit of multi-tracking, the effects are gone.
She's got a few moments on the next record, and I think one or two on this one, where she gets a little OTEP-y. And for those people that think OTEP is the best female vocalist that does heavy, extreme vocals, she's not. But when I hear a very specific delivery, I think, okay, somebody was listening to OTEP today. But this is far above and beyond better than that. It's just not all extreme. Angela was a little more Barney of Napalm Death. It was just constant rasp, no release, no leeway at all. Whereas this can be heavy, and then we fall into the melodic a little bit later on.
My complaint is actually what Dan likes. For me, her vocals are a little too forward and too bright, and that's actually what he likes because it's cutting through the mix, and it's almost because it's almost jarring with her vocals. But I know that's the kind of style that Dan really digs. So I mean, I understand that from his perspective, but I liked I felt that Angela's vocals were fuller and a little further back in the throat. So that's just, it's a personal preference thing. It's not that she's bad. I just liked Angela better.
I think she's way better than Angela, my opinion.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. I mean we're it's all about preference. I
was pretty excited that she was going to be the new vocalist for Arch Enemy, and I think she pulls it off really well. The only weird thing about War Eternal is the fact that she is known in The Agonist as being a really good, clean vocalist as well as an extreme vocalist, and so I thought it was interesting that they didn't utilize that in War Eternal at all. It's just straight growl, which is kind of the Arch Enemy way, I guess. But you know, it was interesting that wasn't present here. What do you guys think of the music on War Eternal?
It was different at first. It was definitely more focused. It definitely pulled from modern death metal at the time. But beyond that, it just felt a lot more engaged and a lot more logical thought put into the arrangement.
I think there's more people on the Dan train than on the Geoff train because War Eternal was obscenely popular.
I think it was way better than Chaos Legions.
This broke the top 50 in the U.S.,
Yeah.
which for Billboard 200 for a metal band is a big fucking deal. And they did it. So I think it was number 44 is what it peaked at, which is at this time with this, there's like metal just doesn't exist in regular radio play anymore. So I mean, they're making this on their fans alone.
Well, and I just want to say too, though, that like War Eternal and Chaos Legions and Rise of the Tyrant and all that, those are good albums, but they don't hold a candle to shit like Wages of Sin or Burning Bridges or Stigmata. Like, that's the hardest part about this band, is accepting that we are never going to be that melodic death metal supergroup that we started as. Because now what you've got is you've got a band that's writing songs that are trying to sound metal, and they're trying to produce hits. It's not as blatant as it was with Demon Hunter, but it is definitely a band that is trying to continue to grow their popularity, which there's nothing wrong with. But I have to tell you that if you are a diehard death metal fan or a diehard Gothenburg or melodic death metal fan, this shit is not going to cut it for you.
Yeah, power metal's starting to really creep its ass into
It really
their
is.
music.
It sounds like, and they've been accused of being a power metal band with a growly vocalist.
Yeah. Well, that's...
And I'm like, dude, no, that's fucking Skeleton Witch. You know? That's, yeah. I like these records, even though I do consider them to be on the poppier side of metal. Like, for sure. Like, this is...
They are on the popular side of metal.
They are. But at the same
musically,
time,
they definitely are.
They've earned it, though, right?
They can do whatever the fuck they want.
I don't think that they've done it via cheap tricks. I think they just kind of, like, looked at the sales and said, okay, people like the Doomsday Machine sound, so we're going to stick with that.
Well, outside of Alyssa, they're all in their 40s and 50s. I mean...
Right, Alyssa's like, what, 13? No, I'm kidding.
She's 32.
32. That's my age. That's funny.
So
I'm making fun of somebody for being my age. But I mean, I can't throw shade because I think she really adds a much needed refresher. Because goddamn, on Chaos Legions, did Angela not sound tired? I mean, she still manages the band. Like, she's still very much involved in everything that they do. And, you know, her chapter in bringing this band, because she did all the fucking legwork.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she pretty much handpicked Alyssa as the new singer. It was literally like, hey, I've created this empire for you, and I want you to, you know. And I thought that was kind of cool, you know, that she was handpicked. But I mean, how often does that happen, that the previous vocalist will handpick the new vocalist? And, you know, I think she does a killer job. I think the music could be a little bit more than it is. But I think at this point in the band, to expect it to ever go back to that Black Earth or Stigmata sound is kind of dumb and kind of short-sighted. So I thought War Eternal was great. And I remember there being like, I kind of thought this was going to be the last Arch Enemy album. I mean, they toured for fucking ever on this. But like, Will to Power didn't come out until 2017. So like, usually Arch Enemy has been a very like 2-year band, but like they kind of like between 2014 and 2017, I was kind of like, I guess the new vocalist thing didn't go over very well because I don't have a new Arch Enemy album out in 2016 or 2015 or whatever. Turns out they were just touring their asses off.
Well, yeah, and then Jeff Loomis wanted to continue to tour, did a solo album.
Right.
And then we have a St. Louis connection because all of Jeff's shit was stolen here in St. Louis.
Nice.
And
So if you go into a thrift store, you might be able to buy some Arch Enemy history.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing well, it's not funny. I mean, it fucking sucks. But they finally caught those assholes because it ended up being like the same group of 4 pieces of shit that were stealing everybody's stuff here in St. Louis. So it took 4 motherfuckers to make the entire city look like assholes. So, but those pricks have been caught, thank God. So they're actually slowly but surely going through all of the inventory because they ended up with several houses filled with equipment. So they're trying to figure out whose shit is whose because this went on for like 3 or 4 years where if you came to St. Louis, lock that shit up because these assholes were going to take it. But no, I was excited that it came out. I'm kind of, getting used to Alyssa at this point, so I still like Angela better, but she fits the music well.
But none of us are like, bring Johan back.
No, none of us are
for
doing
the first time in a long time. Nobody's wishing for the original vocalist.
Right. So let's talk about 2017's Will to Power.
Clean singing is here.
Yes, it is.
As a primary, it's not the.
It's not
focus.
primary. There's like one fucking song that had clean singing, like that had it as the lead vocal.
Well, reason to believe. I think that's like a. When people call it even power ballad.
It's like a power ballad, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's very anti-suicide though, so I like that.
Yeah,
it's got a Hailstorm vibe.
Yeah, I don't think so. So the thing about Will to Power is that it is. Well, did you like War Eternal, Geoff? Because it's kind of like, I hate to be this way at this point, but it's like, fuck, it's another Arch Enemy album.
Yep.
I don't see the innovation anymore. I'm kind of like
10 albums. I've got 4 of them that I really have something to say about.
Oh yeah, I love the first 4, but man, everything after that is very much like
here we go again.
It's enjoyable, but it's but it's made to be that way. It's a sure. When you buy an Arch Enemy album, it's a sure thing.
You know it's going to be a win.
It's steady. It's not always. I wouldn't even say it's a win anymore, but it's just steady. You know what you're gonna get. It's kind of like what Dan was mentioning earlier with he was hitting on the Demon Hunter comparison as far as making things friendly for the ear. And that's, I think, where they're at. Will to Power is Demon Hunter-esque and from that perspective. Not saying that it sounds like Demon Hunter. I just mean that they are making what they think you want to listen to instead of just making music.
It's no longer, hey, dude, I wrote this really badass riff. Check it out.
Yeah.
It's more like, what do you think that the fans are going to want out of this next record?
Exactly.
And every band gets to this point. So, like, I'm not criticizing it specifically for that because, like I said, for the most part, it's a win. For the most part, they guess right.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's what makes them good is the fact that they consistently give you what the audience wants to hear. But Dan can tell you, I'm not always a big fan of that. I want you to go out on the limb and make some really weird ass shit that maybe I'm the only person within a 500-mile radius is gonna like.
Nice.
But
yeah, no, I feel you.
But that doesn't make you any money, especially whenever because Angela's in her 40s, everybody else is, like I said, in their 40s and 50s besides Alyssa.
We can't fault them for being successful,
right?
And that's why we're here, right, to promote how successful the band is and how prolific they have become in this genre. And I mean, that's kind of like, if we're moving into final thoughts, my final thought on Arch Enemy is that, yeah, they kind of stopped being death metal after Wages of Sin. But I think if you have an open mind and you go into the later albums, you're going to find something really enjoyable. And, like we always say on this show, just because they changed a little bit going in doesn't negate what came before. And I think that those first 3 albums are great. If you can't stand Johan, you can go listen to The Root of All Evil, which is a lot of those songs with Angela on them, so you kind of get your cake and eat it too. And I think that's really cool.
Geoff, what about you?
I'm glad that what started out as a quote-unquote supergroup, kind of stuck together and became what they became.
A regular group?
A regular group, yeah. I mean, they just, they stuck with it. Most of the time with a supergroup, you get like 1 or 2 albums and then they're done and they go back to their normal project. This became something that was viable and something that everybody enjoyed, and I can listen to Michael play the guitar all day and all night He's a lot of fun to listen to.
I think Arch Enemy is a sure thing for any fan of heavy metal. You're going to find thrash, you're going to find power metal, you're going to find a little bit of grind, definitely some blast beats, and heavy vocals that are a cut above your average screaming band. And if you're the kind of person that gets stuck on stereotypes, they break several, and they embrace several. So Arch Enemy may not be the headliner, but they're definitely going to be the band that I'm happy to see when I go to that In Flames concert in 2005. Holy shit, Arch Enemy's opening this fucking show? Hell yes.
Well, I'd leave after Arch Enemy if it was In Flames in 2005.
That's like that time Bush headlined and The Urge played before them and everybody in the building just fucking left.
Me and Geoff were on John's Untitled podcast recently, and I told that exact story about everybody leaving after The Urge. Poor Bush. Gavin Rousdale was on stage like, guys. It's really sad. But anyway.
What's your album of the week, Dan?
Mine is The Dark Saga by Iced Earth.
Nice. Speaking my language.
Oh, yeah. Well, this shit was so power metal-y, I had to listen to some real power metal afterwards.
Geoff, what about you?
Okay, so I'm going weird. What a shock, right?
Douche.
I think I've actually put them on the show before. It's a Turkish metal band based out of Germany. Dude, I've played them for you. You liked them.
A Turkish metal band based out of Germany. What the fuck, dude?
Well, they couldn't.
But you can only buy their album bootleg in Russia.
No, they actually had it free for download for the longest time on their website. They left Turkey because they were persecuted because of the music.
What's the band, Geoff?
It's Seth, ETC, and the name of the album is Godspeak.
I was enjoying some Mercyful Fate this week, so my album is going to be Time, because I want to hear about that ghost in the closet.
Ghost?
Ghost, boo! Ghost Brigade, yay! Ghost, boo! Sorry.
I think I'm going to instigate a new drinking game on the podcast. When Geoff goes on a tangent, you have to drink until he stops.
Oh, thank God it's me and not Dan. Holy shit. We'd be dead.
There's a whole different version of that for Dan. And on that note, this has been episode 70 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks. $1 gets you access to an exclusive feed of album reviews.
Give me your money.
And other cool stuff. I don't fucking know how to end that. In 2017, Decibel Geek brought us Rock N Pod Expo in Nashville, Tennessee. This summer, they're doing it again. Rock N Pod Expo 2 on August 25th. Tell us about it, Dan.
We couldn't be more thrilled to be appearing at Rock N Pod this year. In an effort to help support this amazing event, we are throwing in some perks for you guys to help raise the funds necessary to make this event happen. A $35 donation on behalf of Discography Discussion to the Rock N Pod Expo gets you a limited edition Discography Discussion hand-painted beer glass and the option to choose what band we talk about in an upcoming episode of the podcast. This also includes your admission to the expo, access to an exclusive podcast made only for contributors to the event, and we can't wait to meet some of you guys there in person. We'll be hanging out chatting all day. Keep in mind on these perks, there are only 3 of them available, so act fast, and we hope to see you there.